All right, just real quick, my name is Brian Crofts. I'm one of the 4 ambassadors. I wasn't able to be here earlier due to some flight issues, but really great to be here now, and really excited to introduce our next speaker. This is Seema Lakhani. So Seema, we've got to know each other over the past hour before her presentation, but just a couple of things. Number one, she is the head of product for Wattpad. I tried to get the understanding of what that actually means, but I'll have her explain that to you. But Wattpad is a entertainment and storytelling platform that over 65 million people use. And so as a head of product, she's responsible for product management. She's in charge of the direction and the strategy of the product, of course. Another thing important to know that she does as part of her job is she's the head of Wattpad Labs. And Wattpad Labs is really focused on understanding the latest and greatest technology so that they can take their platform to the next level and be the most innovative in their industry. One kind of really, I think, cool fact about Seema is that she is an artist. She's a performer. She spends a lot of time in theater. She acts, she directs, and she writes a bunch of sketch comedy. So with that said, I'm really excited to see what she has to talk about it, and we'll give a warm welcome to Seema.
Awesome, thank you so much for that introduction. So I want to start today with a really big question. I want to start with, why do products exist? Really think about this for yourself. What is your answer? Why do you believe products exist? What's the point? Why do we need them? And also, why do companies exist? What is the purpose of them? Well, I have a strong perspective on this myself, which is products exist to solve a problem for people. We don't have a need for products unless they're making the world better in some way, unless they're solving some sort of need, some sort of problem. That's really the point of products. And in my mind, companies exist as a structure to achieve some sort of greater purpose. The best companies, certainly the best in tech, I think do this really well, where the reason they exist is not about money, though that's important in achieving their vision, but it's their purpose, it's their mission, it's their vision. And if you think about some of the big tech companies and what those missions are, it's quite noble and quite lofty. So Google, it's going to organize the world's information and make it accessible for everybody. Facebook, it's going to make the world more connected and open. Uber, it's going to make transportation something that's accessible to everybody, as easy as running water. These are big, lofty, ambitious things that these companies want to do for the world. They're trying to ultimately make the world better in some way, shape, or form. Money is how they enable that. Money is important because it allows these companies to achieve these visions, but they exist to achieve the vision. It reminds me of a quote that I really like by Walt Disney, where he was asked about why he makes movies, and he says, "I don't make movies to make money. I make movies to make more movies." And I think that's super, super important for us all to remember, especially in the context of responsible products. So where do we fit in as product people? How do we fit into this whole thing? Well, we're the people who manage the process of how our companies make those products and deliver on those missions and those visions. We facilitate the process of making sure these products are actually delivering on what they're supposed to do. And we have to do it while balancing all of these other constraints, whether that's technology challenges, business needs, quarterly targets, various needs that are always competing from people from across the company. And we have to do that, but with the ultimate objective of serving that vision or that mission. So a bit more about me, who I am, why I care, why you're here watching this talk instead of watching the football match, which, I mean, it's early still, right? France is going to go a long way, so we're okay. A bit more about me. So the personal side of who I am. I'm a huge nerd. I love learning. I've always been obsessed with learning. I was that person who audited high school courses. I just love getting new information. But the thing I'm probably the most obsessed with is people. I really want to understand what makes us tick, how people are different, how people think, what makes us human. These are things that really drive me. As Brian mentioned, I'm a creative person at heart as well. Acting, comedy, directing. To me, those are all ways that I feel more connected to the human experience, to the human condition. Acting very literally, like I'm taking on a character and I'm feeling the things they feel. And it's super interesting for me. But why I was drawn to tech and why I was drawn to Wattpad was that I am motivated by wanting to make a difference. The reason I got into this industry is the promise that of these visions and missions, the promise that we can actually make things better in the products we build. And now all the sort of more boring, formal resume stuff. I went to business school, so my background in product came more from the business side. I did management consulting, learned a lot, was not my thing. Then worked at an innovation center in Toronto. Went to work at a big media company in Canada in their corporate development group. Built and failed my own startup, definitely the badge of honor, I think, of a lot of product managers, I'm sure, in this room. I joined Wattpad in a business capacity first. And that's when I found product management, absolutely fell in love with it, became a product manager, and went on to then become head of product, and now also head of Wattpad Labs. So a little bit more about Wattpad, and what is this storytelling platform. We'll start with just a little bit of a video on the product itself. Cool, so that's the product, so you get a pretty good idea of how it works. Wattpad is a platform where people share stories, mostly in book form, so people are reading and writing from all around the world. We're a small sort of startup that started in Canada, very much as a Toronto-based company a number of years ago, formed in 2006 by two founders who just really wanted to read on their phones. This was sort of pre-smartphone era. And it turned into something gigantic. So we are actually over 65 million users all around the world in almost every country, in over 50 languages. This is a product that people can read, write, share stories. It's very social. We have over 500 million stories now on Wattpad. Many of them have gone on to become really successful, whether it's best-selling novels or even movies, television shows, etc. We have some really popular content on Netflix and Hulu, and actually a whole lot of stuff all over Asia as well in the entertainment space there. So this is a product that is being used by people, and it's touching them, and it reaches them in a really emotional way. It's something that we're really proud of in how people are using this product is that you're seeing stories emerge on this platform that you don't usually see, stories that are not necessarily out in the mainstream, and have become actually incredibly popular because of this platform that's essentially democratized reading and writing. You're seeing stories that are representing voices, representing people that aren't always heard. We have a really large LGBTQ population on Wattpad that writes like amazing love stories. You have, actually there's a really great Muslim love story sort of category that's picking up right now as well. There's just some really great stories, a lot of stories that feature people of color, which is not super common. So you're starting to see these things emerge and become really popular, and as a result, starting to become mainstream phenomenon. So what exactly do I do at product, and what does this have to do with responsible product building? So the biggest job I have is I lead our product team. So this is our product managers that we have at Wattpad. Super proud. One of the things you'll probably notice is that they're all women. The other thing you'll probably notice, these are people from all around the world, and that diversity of perspective has been super, super valuable. One of the things that, we talked about diverse teams earlier, one of the things that I really value is the different perspectives this team brings to the table. So people in this group come from backgrounds all the way from traditional computer science, marketing, customer success, all the way through to things like neuroscience, journalism, published authors, entrepreneurs. The perspectives that are brought to the table here are fantastic, particularly given the nature of our community and our product. So as head of product, my main job is really to empower and support this team. I'm there to help them grow. That means making sure I'm giving them the practices, the processes, the skills, the tools they need to do their job successfully. They're the ones on the ground actually making those product calls, working with those teams, making sure we're shaping the right direction, and I have to give them the right things to work with to be able to do that well. I also guide the overall product strategy, so work with them collectively to guide how we actually fulfill Wattpad's vision, which is to entertain and connect the world through stories with our product. And how are we going to best do that? I also get another really fun job, which is I get to lead our labs division. Now, Wattpad Labs is focused on the future of storytelling. So we're thinking about what is storytelling going to look like 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And this is probably one of the most fun things I get to do, which is I get to think a lot about what will always be true about storytelling and what will change. So what will always be true? Storytelling is a fundamental human trait. We have been telling stories since before we had language. Think about that. Like cave paintings we're talking about. Like before we knew how to properly communicate with each other with words, we still told stories because that's how we connected as a species. Storytelling is all about imagination, empathy, connection. It shapes how we think, how we live, how we relate to each other, what our values are. Technology is an enabler of that. Technology enables different ways that we can tell those stories. So if you think about the history of storytelling, and just some highlights that I want to point to, if you think about the history of storytelling and different parts of technology or of the world shifting that has allowed us to tell stories in different ways. So I'll start with like early civilization. Just the formation of people living together in villages or towns or cities created a form of storytelling called theatrical reenactment or theater. And that started because people needed ways to share their own legends and mythology to each other, to shape their own values and their cultural beliefs. And that was such an important part of what built civilizations. I'll fast forward to another big invention, the printing press, obviously. I mean, this is a huge one. It meant the birth of the modern novel. It meant that you could now scale storytelling in a way that you could never do it before. Someone could actually write the words on a page, a full character journey, a full plot, and people, thousands of people, more than thousands of people all around the world could read those stories and could have that common language. Internet, obviously, huge one, right? This one, the internet and mobile, had a big impact on storytelling. Now we're talking even larger scale. Anyone can create a story that millions of people around the world can see. So the scale becomes even bigger. The democratization of the space of being a writer gets even bigger, or any sort of storyteller. But also interaction starts to happen. Not only can you have scale, but you can have interactivity. That's something you couldn't have before. That's sort of the stuff Wattpad got to play in. And then now, as head of Wattpad Labs, I get to think about what's coming next. I get to think about augmented reality, virtual reality, blockchain, all the new technologies, and I get to think, well, what is this going to do to storytelling? How is this going to change maybe how people feel immersed in stories? How is this going to change our economies around storytelling? So that's something I have a lot of fun with. In both those roles, the point of it is, whether it's head of product or in a labs role, and in any product development capacity, impact is a really big deal. And it's something we have to think about very, very carefully. So in my world, it's stories. Stories are personal. Stories are often very tied to our identities. Writers, therefore, are very vulnerable when they're putting their story out in the world. Even reading is an act of vulnerability in a sense, because reading shapes a lot of how we see the world, how we think about and learn about ourselves. A lot of Wattpad users are quite young. We have a lot of teenagers on our platform. I guarantee if you ask a teenage girl in particular about Wattpad, they will have lots to share about it. They're finding themselves on this platform. That's a very intense piece that we hold sort of responsibility around. So we have to be very, very thoughtful about the impact that our product is having on the world. And I think this is true of any product. I mean, I see it in the sort of sensitivity around stories and identity and young people, but this could apply to any product. So I want to talk about the two types of impact today. One is intentional impact. So that's the impact that we actually intend to have on the world, that we intend to have on our users. So intentional impact is ultimately about making sure that our products are actually delivering on the vision and mission that we set out. I know North Star was used earlier in one of the other talks, but vision and mission is the North Star. That is why our companies and our products exist. It is to deliver on this vision and mission. Intentional impact means we need to reflect that we are actually getting towards that vision and mission. We need to break it down and be able to show that we're making steps towards it. So I'll talk about 3 tips in doing that. One is making sure you're measuring the right things. Another is balancing your business problems and your user problems and walking that tightrope. And another is living and breathing the human side of that impact. So let's start with measure the right things. You optimize towards what you measure. This is universally true. If the biggest thing that your CEO puts up every day is a revenue number, a monthly active user number, a growth number, that's what you'll care about because that's what the organization cares about. Whatever the number is that your organization is driving towards, maybe it's your big objective for the year, what maybe your biggest KPI, whatever it is that you sort of look at the most and that you optimize that you have is what you will optimize towards. You will make decisions about your product. Everyone will make decisions about your product that are optimizing towards that particular metric, for better or worse. So that's why it's really important to measure the right things. What metrics actually indicate that you're delivering on your vision? Think about that. For all the products you work on, think about what are the metrics that actually tell you if you're, or at least indicate a hint towards you're actually getting towards achieving that. Hint, it's probably not revenue or profit. Not as a straight line anyway, unlikely. It's also probably not growth, clicks, page views, you name a funnel metric. It's probably not those either. Not that those aren't helpful to your business and not that you shouldn't measure those. Obviously, these are important for the sake of your business. Some of these will be very important for the sake of your business. But you have to be careful how much you optimize towards these metrics, especially if you're undermining your actual purpose. So the dangers of the wrong metric. If you're making product decisions that are not in service of the vision, but rather in service of this other metric intentionally, you're ultimately driving towards, you're missing out on driving towards the actual purpose of your business. So some examples, right? Like you can do a lot to drive downloads. If you're trying to drive downloads, there's plenty of things you can do. You can spam people's address books as they sign up. You can, there's all kinds of things you can do to drive downloads. Granted, those are short-term things, but there's even long-term things you can do. You can do a lot to drive revenue. You can put subscription products in and hope people will, like the gym membership model, and hope people will never actually remember that they signed up for it. There's all kinds of things that happen that businesses do to drive up certain numbers. And those might make for profitable businesses, but they don't make for products or businesses that actually matter, that we actually need in this world. So the next is to balance business problems and user problems. So we need to care about both. I know I said that you shouldn't just optimize towards revenue, but it does still matter. If we only solve user problems, we can't sustain our business, so it doesn't really matter. We'll never achieve that great purpose. So revenue and profit still have to matter, and we have to make sure that our business is healthy. But if we only solve the business problems, then we've missed out the point of why our product exists. And one of the toughest parts of product management is, amongst many other things, you're balancing both of these. You're having to constantly think about that. And so the perfect situation, which does happen sometimes, is when there is a solution that meets both needs, that drives towards your sustainable business and really helps you ultimately deliver on your vision. And those are magical moments, and you should do those. But there are times when you can't. There are times when you are forced to make a choice between one or the other. And it's about knowing consciously that you're making that choice and making sure that you're not consistently making the same choice, that you're balancing. It comes back to people. So this one I cannot talk enough on. I could probably do a whole other talk on this, but this one I think all of you as good product people in the room, I'm sure will subscribe to. Seek to understand, right? The greatest product managers are people who are constantly seeking to understand their users. That means they're talking to them. That means they're watching their behaviors. It means they're really trying to understand why they do the things they do. For us at Wattpad, that means we have an informal rule that every product manager needs to be talking to at least 2 users a week. Now, that can sometimes be in very formal user interview settings, but even without that, I encourage just casual conversations to be constantly happening so that people are really, like the product managers are really in touch with the users, their needs, their perspectives, their thought process, their lives. These are important contextual clues that help us understand our users better and the impact that we are having, and ultimately if we're achieving what we're trying to achieve and knowing the challenges we'll have in doing that. Empathy, I cannot talk enough about empathy. It's a huge, huge part of being a fantastic product manager. We all talk about empathy a lot in the industry, and I think sometimes it gets misused. When I say empathy, I mean real empathy. I don't mean pity. I don't mean sympathy. I don't mean like you're sort of being paternalistic towards your users. I mean that you're actually really thinking of them as complex human beings, and you're understanding the full context of their situation and treating them with quite a bit of respect as a result. Seeing people use your product. This is, to me, one of my most favorite parts of the job of product. I remember when I first became a product manager, some of the most amazing moments to me, the most fulfilling parts of the job were in seeing people use the product and in talking to them about it. It's so very fulfilling. In my case, I remember a lot of conversations with 15-year-old girls talking about how they love reading and how when they found this product, it actually felt like for the first time they were home and how they'd found their identity and how they feel like they finally fit in. And these are the sorts of things that like make my day, right? Like it's super exciting to hear about that type of stuff. And it reinforces the responsibility you have because of the impact you have on these people's lives. It also is incredibly humbling because most of the time you're wrong about the assumptions you make about your users, why they're doing what they're doing. And in this process of seeing people use your product, you will always find those moments of, okay, that is not what I thought was going to happen. That is not what I thought was going to go on. And that is super helpful in making sure that you're building better product and you're iterating in the right way. And also that you're thinking very carefully about the impact you're having. So you do all that, right? You make sure you're balancing user and business problems, you're feeling really connected to your users, you're measuring the right things, so then you're building responsible products, right? Not quite, not yet. There's also unintentional impact. This is something that I'd say has been pretty in the news or in sort of recent events, something that's become a larger part of the conversation. This is the impact that you're working towards your vision, your mission, and you have great intentions, and you're doing a lot of things right there. But there's also other things that end up happening. So once your product goes out into the world, it develops a life of its own. You have all kinds of ideas of exactly how people are going to use it, and it's a little bit different than that, sometimes a lot different than that. People will use your product in new and unexpected ways. Some of those ways are amazing and revealing and actually are shortcuts to your vision and mission, and you should pay a lot of attention to that and use that to iterate on your product. But others are actually dangerous. Other ways that people will use your product is not in a positive way. And if you ignore those behaviors until they've become a business risk, which unfortunately does happen, then you failed to build your product responsibly. So let's take a trip down memory lane. It's the late 2000s, social platforms are emerging and growing really fast. It's all about growth and network effects and driving usage. Bullying, harassment, predatory behavior, hate speech, all of those things are not part of the conversation at most of these companies. They haven't even thought in a lot of cases about this stuff yet, or some tech companies were actually priding themselves on being agnostic to those issues. They're just the platform. We're just platform builders. Whatever happens on top is more the people who are using its responsibility. Well, I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. And one of the things that drew me to Wattpad and that I really liked, and I think made it a bit unique, not that it's perfect, but one thing that they did really early on, the founders really cared about this type of stuff. The founders really, really cared about making sure that the people using Wattpad, especially knowing that it was a lot of young people, were going to be safe. And so they were thinking day one, as they were building the product, about how to handle these types of issues. Things like bullying, harassment, hate. And a big part of that was a strong belief in community. While our founders didn't just view us as a platform, yes, we were a platform, but we were also a community. So some of the things we did that helped us in the early days, particularly with some of these very negative behaviors, is we had a trust and safety team from very early on. Now it's very hot and like everyone's got giant teams and is expanding them, and we see a lot of the reasons why that's happening, but this is something we had from very, very early on. Clear content guidelines. I mean, a lot of companies have this, but how many companies enforce this? Content guidelines that are very clear on what behaviors are acceptable, what are not, what content is okay, what is not. This is something we were very clear about from the early days, and we also enforced. And that created a set of expectations of what was going to happen on the platform, what was not going to happen on the platform. Active moderation is part of that. You need active moderation to actually be able to enforce these things. And lastly, it's actually not just about policing, it's also about modeling positive behaviors. So one thing that really helped us building a community when a lot of, don't read the comments, stay away from the trolls was happening, was because we actually had a lot of our users, we called them ambassadors. These were users who were very strong advocates of our platform, very big users of our platform, and we actually worked with them, pulled them into sort of a volunteer program for Wattpad, where we worked with them to set sort of guidelines of behavior and how they could help the community, and they actually went out and modeled positive behaviors. So that meant someone just posted a story, and they'll post a comment saying, hey, like, this is great, this is so brave of you to put this story up, I encourage you to post another chapter, that kind of thing. And when you see that happening in the community, the people who are trolls, the people who do want to, harass or hate, they don't feel as welcome because they don't see that that's what the norms of the community are. This is shaping the norms and mores of the community by actually modeling positive behavior. And if you do that early, it can save you a ton of time trying to clean up negative behaviors later on. Another thing this is more of a recent thing that we're doing, but we were named one of the safest spaces on the internet fairly recently, and some of the stuff that you're seeing that is happening as a result of this is that we're partnering with a lot of organizations to do things like this, which is Pen Your Pride. It's a campaign we're working on for Pride Month this month, where people are writing LGBTQ stories and tagging them, and we have sort of contests going around it, and this is something you have to make sure that you have a safe space if people are doing things like this, because this is something that is hard for a lot of people to talk about, and having a place where people can talk about this type of stuff and feel really safe in doing so is something that we've always had. And we would not have been able to do these types of things on our product had we not been investing in these things from the beginning. So products as weapons. Products can totally be used as weapons, as we just talked about. The important thing for you as a product manager or product person to do is to anticipate and to mobilize. You need to do your best to anticipate before you've launched something, before you've changed something about the product, about how people will use that to weaponize, how they will use it for nefarious purposes. And you'll have to do your best to build protections for that into the product. Granted, you will not catch 100% of the concerns, of the issues, but you have to be watching so that you see this behavior very early and you can do something about it very, very early. Definitely don't wait till thousands or tens of thousands of people are affected. Take a really active role in protecting people via both, this is through policy, this is through how you enforce it, and this is through product. Have very easy paths to deal with harassment. Women face a ton of harassment in life and on the internet, and this is something that if you are making it, if you're not building controls into your product, then this will not be a place where those people want to come. So make sure you have really, really easy paths to deal with these issues. And yes, it is the right thing to do, and you should do it for all those reasons, but also these problems don't really go away. They only get bigger. Eventually, they do become business risks, whether those are PR disasters, user abandonment, regulatory action. Like these things do accumulate, and we're starting to see a lot of that actually now. Another thing in here, beyond just products as weapons, is you also have to think about the negative consequences, the unintentional negative consequences of your product, even when people didn't mean for it to be negative. This is the type of stuff where what would happen if someone just became obsessed with your product and used it all the time? What would that do to their life? How do you understand and how do you mitigate against that? Things like, how does this product help develop relationships between people or hurt those relationships between people, right? Things that are unintentional, but things you should consider. There is a fantastic resource online. An organization put this together. It's called the Tarot Cards of Tech. You can look it up. It's really great, and it gives you a deck of cards to ask you yourself these types of questions as you're building product, and it brings out these types of insights around how will people use your product. Quick side note on regulation, because I mentioned it. So regulation, I actually do support some degree of regulation around our industry. I think that there will always be bad actors, there will always be people who are not building with responsibility in mind, and regulation is an important part of preventing and taking action when that happens. But regulations are by far, far from perfect. It assumes that the regulation is timely, which it often isn't, especially in our space. It assumes the regulation is properly drafted and understands the technology and the use as well, which isn't always the case. And it assumes that the regulation is going to catch 100% of people, which certainly it doesn't. But regardless of that, I think if we're relying on regulation to be the thing that forces us to be responsible, then we failed. We failed on technology's great promise of changing the world, on all those vision and mission statements and why these companies, why these products exist. And we failed on product management's great promise of actually ensuring we're balancing the needs of our users, of our business, of technology to actually build the right things. We failed. We need to hold each other accountable around all of these things. So I want to talk a bit about the values of product management as a field, as a role. What are our values as product managers? Had to throw this in there, but it's a really big job. Product management carries a ton of responsibility, which means it requires a lot of maturity and care. So closing thought on this, think about the role of product management. Think about the industry of tech. Think about startup culture. Certain jobs and certain industries attract certain people. It's always been true. The nature of how we talk about a job, who we identify as successful, what we celebrate as successful, how those people act, the companies they represent, that shapes the values of the role. Every role and every industry has a set of values, whether we're aware of them or not. I remember when I was in business school, it was 2005, 6, 7, and it was right before the last big recession. And at the time, there was a very clear set of values around the banking industry. It was attracting a very specific type of person. The values were about greed. The values were about self-interest. The values were about power and status. And it attracted a ton of people who were super attracted to those things. And it had some pretty devastating consequences. Right now, tech is really hot. Product management is a super sexy job. It comes with status, it comes with influence. A whole new set of people are entering this industry and this field. So we should ask ourselves, what are our values? What do we care about? What do we celebrate? Because we are the representatives of the field. If what we care about, if what we celebrate, is about being the person who gets to make all the decisions, about being the mini CEO, about having control, think about who that'll attract. And think about what will that ultimately lead to. But if our values are about making sure that we're delivering on these visions, if our values are about bringing people together, if our values are about diversity and inclusion and making sure we're building the right thing and we're being very thoughtful about how people use it and the impact it has on their lives, who will that attract? What will that lead to? So think of the possibilities. Think of the promise of technology. I mean, it's why I got into it, and I imagine it's why a lot of you got into it too. We're excited by the idea of impact. Whether that impact is like massive and on a global scale or a little bit more controlled, but we want to be making things better for somebody. The role of product management is ultimately about being that guide, about balancing all of those needs and taking us in the right direction. So think about how product managers can be the guide for technology and how they can make these visions and missions actually come true, especially now, when I think we need this type of thinking more than ever in this industry and in the world. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Seema. That was awesome. So we're going to now transition quickly into Q&A. It looks like most of the questions are about the score of the match. So we'll skip those, but there is some good news. Anyways, a couple of questions here, and feel free to write in. We'll take them live right now. But one of the questions is, has to do with Facebook. So when you look at what's happening today at Facebook and Twitter, what would you do to help correct the problems that they have with harassment? Is it possible to fix once the issues have been allowed to take root?
It's harder to fix once you've already established the sort of rules of the game. If the rules of the game are this is how you take someone down on Twitter, then it's much harder to stop that. But I'm a fairly optimistic person, and I do think it can be stopped. Some of the things that I'd probably do to, specifically whether it's Facebook or Twitter and it's harassment specifically, is a lot of the blocking functionality. So this is something that, for anyone who's ever been harassed on those platforms, a lot of the blocking functionality and a lot of the reporting functionality and how seriously it's taken and how it's actually handled. In some ways, both Facebook and Twitter have actually made some strides here in both the blocking and reporting functionality, but there's a lot further they can go to actually take this to the next level, whether it's sort of multiple people reporting a person, how that gets escalated through their internal processes, their own policies on what they will accept or not. I've known a lot of people who've gotten harassed on all of these platforms, and the way it's actually handled has been very, very challenging because there's a lot of onus on them to prove something, and so I think there can be a lot better ways to manage that.
Cool. Well, there's a lot of questions about that slide that you had with an all-female team. So how come your product team is only female?
How come all of you are mostly male? No, but actually, like, we're sitting in a room,
Maybe the better question would be, how did you do it?
How did I do it? So here's a few things. Part of it is me, right? Like, part of it is when you see a woman in leadership at a company, whether it's product or engineering or even in other roles, it makes it easier for other women to put their hand up and want to work there. This is something women and minorities do all the time, is we walk around the office and as we're interviewing or we look on the website, and if we don't see anyone like us, we're less likely to be interested in working there. This is true, right? So part of it is me being in that position enables some of that. Part of it is also, I mean, outreach and how you do your outreach, right? So a lot of people struggle with like, oh, I don't have enough women in my pipeline or enough, people of color in my pipeline. Well, you can control your pipeline. A lot of that is how you go out. Are you partnering with the right organizations? Are you getting out there in front of the right organizations? And that is something that you can make a real difference in.
Great. This next one, you really inspire me. My company's North Star is money and didn't care about GDPR. Should I quit? So little career advice. Who was that, by the way? Can I just ask?
I mean, these are personal things, right? Like I said, I'm idealistic, but I'm not naive, right? So I said that companies and products should exist for the purposes of their vision and mission, but that isn't always true. There are people who start businesses purely for opportunistic reasons, purely for money reasons, and that's a choice, and that's a choice. But if you're working in one of those companies, then that is what your own values will reflect, right? So you can do what you can to control that.
Great, and just maybe one or two more. Do you think a startup's business model, for example, VC-funded growth or cash flow positive businesses, have a big impact on a company's product and overall culture, for example, like Uber or whatever?
It can. It depends a lot on who your investors are, and so there are definitely fantastic investors who are looking very much at the long term and ones who are thinking about, hey, if I want this to be a $10 billion company and I want this to be a company that's sustainable over the long run and I care about the people in the business making the right decisions. There are also investors who are looking for a quick buck, just like there are people of all kinds sort of inside these businesses. So I think that certainly you can get into a situation where VCs or investors are driving your company to make certain product decisions or culture decisions that are not actually in line with your own values. And that's why you have to be super careful in finding that right relationship and that right investor. But it works both ways.
Got it. And we'll end with this one, and then I can share a score with you if you want. Why aren't you hiring product people right now? I checked, and I'm really sad, and I was going to move to Toronto.
I've got a posting going up next week, actually. So there will be a product manager posting going up next week, and get in touch.
Awesome. I think that's it. So let's give a round of applause. That was awesome.